Have you ever been the one person in your family who just doesn't fit in? The one they look at with pity? The one they whisper about when they think you can't hear? For 28 years, that was me. They thought I was a failure, a daydreamer destined for a life of mediocrity. And at my sister's engagement dinner, they made sure I knew it. They just never imagined that the person they were mocking was the one who could destroy everything they held dear with a single word. The clinking of silverware against fine china was a sound that should have been pleasant, but to me it was the ticking of a clock, counting down the seconds until my next humiliation. I sat at a round table in the city's most expensive restaurant, a place with dark wood walls and chandeliers that dripped light like melting diamonds. The air smelled of roasted garlic and money. This was a family dinner to celebrate my older sister, Jessica, and her engagement to a man named Liam. It felt less like a celebration and more like a stage, and I knew, without a doubt, that I was the designated fool. My stomach was a tight, painful knot. I'd spent 2 hours getting ready, trying to make myself look presentable, acceptable, anything other than what they saw me as. I'd chosen my best dress, a simple navy blue sheath I'd bought on sale. It was elegant, I thought, understated, but as I felt my family's eyes drift over me, I knew understated wasn't the word they were thinking of. They were thinking plain. They were thinking cheap. My parents, Susan and David, flanked Jessica and Liam like royal guards. My mother, her face a carefully constructed mask of polite excitement, was practically purring as she listened to Liam talk about his latest venture. My father nodded along, his expression a mixture of awe and pride. This was the kind of success they understood. Tangible, loud, profitable. And the Series B funding should close by the end of the quarter, Liam was saying, his voice smooth and confident. He was handsome, I had to admit, with a sharp jawline and eyes that seemed to assess the value of everything they landed on. "Oh, that's just wonderful, Liam," my mother cooed, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "We are just so thrilled to have you joining the family." Jessica beamed, her smile as sharp and dazzling as the diamond on her finger. She looked every bit the part of the successful corporate lawyer she was. Her hair perfectly styled, her dress a designer piece that probably cost more than my rent. She was the golden child, the sun around which our family's universe revolved. And I was the dim, distant moon, barely reflecting any of her light. The conversation naturally, cruelly, turned to the wedding. It was going to be a massive, high society affair. The guest list was a who's who of the city's elite. The venue was a historic ballroom. Everything was perfect. Everything was expensive. My mother let out a soft, theatrical sigh, and her eyes found me across the table. It was my turn. "Chloe, darling," she began, her voice dripping with concern that felt more like an accusation. "We'll have to find you something suitable to wear for the wedding. We can't have you showing up looking, well, like that." Her gaze flickered down to my navy dress, and the meaning was clear. Like that meant like me. Poor, unimportant. A disappointment. The air grew thick. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. Before I could even form a response, a sound cut through the silence. It was Jessica's laugh, not a happy, joyful sound, but a sharp, cruel bark that was designed to wound. "Oh, Mom, don't bother," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "She probably can't even afford a decent dress. She's a professional party planner, you know." She's the words party planner, as if they were a disease, which is basically code for unemployed. "It's a hobby, not a career." She then leaned toward Liam, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's code for use." The table erupted, not in outrage, but in polite, restrained chuckles. My father, my own father, shook his head with a sad smile. "We just want you to have ambition, honey," he said, his tone gentle but his words like daggers. "Not a hobby, there's a difference." They were all laughing at me. My parents, my sister, even Liam, who gave me a small, sympathetic smile that was somehow the most insulting expression of all. It was the smile you give a child who has just told you they want to be a unicorn when they grow up. It was pity. I was being publicly mocked, laughed at, and branded a failure. A nobody. I was excluded from their perfect, shiny world. A world where your worth was measured by your job title and the price tag on your clothes. I felt my face burning, a deep, painful shame that settled in my chest like a stone. I had to get out of there. "Excuse me," I mumbled, my voice barely a whisper. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the polished floor. I didn't look at any of them as I walked away, but I could feel their eyes on my back. I could still hear the faint echo of their laughter. I stumbled into the ladies' restroom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock on the stall. I leaned my forehead against the cool, smooth door and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to breathe. But the air wouldn't come. All I could see were their faces. My mother's disappointment, my father's pity, Jessica's triumphant smirk. After a moment, I pushed myself away from the door and walked to the ornate sinks. I stared at my reflection in the gilded mirror. My eyes were red. My face was pale. I looked exactly like what they said I was, small, defeated, and weak. But as I stood there, looking at the girl in the mirror, something inside me shifted. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed insults, of forced smiles, it all began to curdle. The shame didn't disappear, but it transformed. It crystallized into a cold, hard knot of resolve in the pit of my stomach. This was it. This was the last time. This was the last family dinner, the last reunion, the last gathering where they would ever make me feel this small. They thought I was a nobody. They thought I was a failure. They had no idea who I was, or what I was capable of. They had just lit a fire, and I was going to let it burn. The next day, the memory of the dinner felt like a bruise on my soul. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear my sister's sharp laugh, feel the weight of my parents' disappointment. I spent the morning in a fog of misery, pacing my small apartment, the words useless and failure echoing in my head. I needed a distraction, something to do with my hands to quiet my mind. That's when I remembered the box. It was a simple cardboard box, tucked away in the back of my closet, filled with things my grandma Eleanor had left me when she passed away a year ago. She was the only one in my family who had ever truly seen me. While my parents pushed me towards what they considered a real career, like law or medicine, Grandma Eleanor had always encouraged my creative side. She'd praised the elaborate birthday parties I planned for my dolls, the detailed little worlds I built in her garden. "You have a gift for making things beautiful, Chloe," she used to say, her voice warm and kind. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that's not important." Her loss had left a gaping hole in my life. I hadn't been able to bring myself to go through her things properly. It was too painful. But today, the pain of her absence felt less sharp than the fresh wound from my family. I pulled the box out and sat on the floor, lifting the lid. Inside were the familiar, comforting things: a worn copy of her favorite book, a knitted scarf that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, a handful of old photographs, and on top of it all is a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in her elegant, looping script. A note attached to it said, "To be opened on your 28th birthday." My 28th birthday had been last month. In the haze of my ongoing struggle to make ends meet, and the constant feeling of being a disappointment, I had completely forgotten about it. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, a small, old-fashioned key, and a check. I unfolded the letter first. Her handwriting was as familiar as her voice, and as I read I could almost hear her speaking to me. "My dearest Chloe," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. But I hope you know that my love for you is not. I am writing this because I know you, and I know your family. They are good people, in their own way, but they are well-meaning but blind. They see the world in numbers and titles, and they have never understood that your heart is a different kind of treasure." Tears pricked my eyes, blurring the words. I wiped them away and kept reading. I have watched you your whole life. I have seen the way you can turn a simple room into a magical place. I have seen the joy you bring to others with your creativity. That is not a hobby, my girl. That is a talent. A powerful one. But I know you have been discouraged. I know you feel small. That is why I am leaving you this. My eyes fell to the check. I picked it up with unsteady fingers. My breath caught in my throat. The check was made out to me, Chloe Evans. The amount was $25,000. It felt like an impossible number. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a lifeline. This is your inheritance, Chloe, the letter continued. But it comes with a condition. This is not for paying off debts or buying a fancy car. This is seed money. I want you to use this to start the business you have always dreamed of. Elysian Event. I always loved that name you came up with. I want you to build it, to show them all what you are capable of. Do not be afraid to fail, but be terrified of never trying. The letter went on, offering words of love and encouragement that felt like a healing balm on my wounded spirit. And then, there was a final instruction. I know this is a daunting task, so I have made one small arrangement. There is a man, an old and dear friend of mine, named Mr. Chen. He is a formidable man, a dragon in the world of business, but he owes me a favor. If you choose to take this path, call him. Show him your heart and your mind. He will be a guide for you. His number is on the back of this letter. And one last thing, the key. It opens storage unit C14 at the downtown facility. It's a place I kept for my own little secrets. Perhaps you will find something useful there. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the ghost of my grandmother's love, holding a check that felt like a fantasy and a key that felt like a promise. The despair that had clung to me since last night began to recede, replaced by a fragile, flickering flame of hope. My family thought I was a failure, but my grandmother, the wisest person I ever knew, had believed in me. She had left me not just money, but a plan. An hour later, I was standing in a dimly lit hallway at the downtown storage facility, the air thick with the smell of dust and forgotten things. The key felt cold in my hand. I found Unit C14, a large, roll-up metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the beginning of my tangible struggle. A small nest egg against a mountain of ambition. With a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and with a loud, metallic groan, I pushed the door up. The inheritance was a shield, but the real world was a battlefield. Armed with my grandmother's belief and $25,000, I officially launched Elysian Events. The name, which had once been a silly daydream I'd scribbled in a notebook, was now printed on a business license. I used a portion of the money to build a professional website, buy design software, and print a small batch of elegant business cards. The rest, I guarded fiercely, knowing it was the only safety net I had. My office was the corner of my tiny one-bedroom apartment. My desk was a second-hand table I'd found on the street, and my filing cabinet was a series of labeled cardboard boxes. The first few months were a brutal lesson in humility. I was no longer just a dreamer. I was a small business owner, which meant I was also the accountant, the marketing department, the janitor, and the very anxious CEO. To get my name out there, I took any job I could find, no matter how small. I planned a 6-year-old superhero-themed birthday party, complete with a collapsing building cake that took me 12 hours to engineer. I organized a retirement party for an office manager, where my biggest challenge was convincing the staff not to use confetti cannons indoors. I coordinated a small baby shower, where the mother-to-be went into labor halfway through. Each event was a tiny victory, but the pay was minimal, and my savings were dwindling at an alarming rate. There were nights I'd sit at my desk staring at a spreadsheet of my expenses, and the red numbers would blur together. In those quiet, desperate moments, my family's voices would come creeping back. Useless. Hobby. Lose. The fear was a cold, physical thing, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I was burning through my grandmother's gift, and for a terrifying moment, I thought my family might have been right all along. I was so close to giving up, to crawling back and admitting defeat. But then I would look at the faded, worn copy of Grandma Eleanor's letter, be terrified of never trying, she had written. I couldn't let her down. I couldn't let myself down. I remembered the second part of her gift, Mr. Chen. The dragon. For weeks I had been too intimidated to call him. He was a legend in the city, a hotel magnate who owned some of the most luxurious properties in the country. What would a man like that want with someone like me? Someone who was currently debating whether a hot dog costume was appropriate for a corporate picnic. Finally, driven by desperation, I picked up the phone. My hand was slick with sweat as I dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. I stammered out my name and my reason for calling, and after a long, terrifying pause, I was put through. Chin, a deep, gravelly voice grunted into the phone. I took a shaky breath. Mr. Chen, my name is Chloe Evans. My grandmother was Eleanor Evans. She left me a letter. I know who you are, he cut in, his voice devoid of any warmth. Eleanor told me she might send you. What do you want? His bluntness was like a splash of cold water. I almost hung up, but then I remembered the look on my sister's face. I straightened my back. I want your guidance, sir, I said, my voice steadier now. I've started my event planning business, Elysian Events. Grandma Eleanor said you owed her a favor. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. A favor to her is not a blank check to you, he said finally. May at my office tomorrow. 10 a.m. Bring your business plan. Don't be late. He hung up before I could reply. The next morning, I stood in the lobby of his corporate headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper of glass and steel. I felt hopelessly small and out of place. His office was on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the city that made my apartment feel like a shoebox. Mr. Chen was exactly as I had imagined, formidable, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. He didn't offer me a seat. He simply gestured to the massive mahogany desk. The plan, he said. For the next hour, he grilled me. He tore my business plan apart, questioning every projection, every assumption. He was relentless, his questions sharp and precise. It was terrifying, but as he pushed me, something inside me ignited. This wasn't my family's vague, dismissive criticism. This was a professional challenge. I met every question with the passion and detailed knowledge I had kept hidden for so long. I didn't just talk about my dreams. I showed him my work. I pulled out my portfolio, a binder filled with photos and testimonials from my small jobs. The smiling kids at the birthday party, the thank you note from the office manager. He flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. He spent a long time looking at the picture of the collapsing building cake. When he was done, he closed the binder and leaned back in his chair, studying me in silence. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he let out a short, sharp grunt. Your grandmother was a good woman, he said, his voice a low rumble. Sentimental. But she was never a fool. He looked me straight in the eye. You have a good eye for detail. And you are not afraid of hard work. That is rare. He paused. I have a mid-level corporate terrain coming up for one of my smaller subsidiary companies. It's a dry, boring affair. No one wants to plan it. If you can make it successful, we will talk again. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a high society wedding. But it was a lifeline. It was a test from the dragon himself. Thank you, Mr. Chen, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I won't let you down. He simply nodded. See that you don't. The corporate reunion for Mr. Chen's company was my first real test, and it required me to scout venues I'd only ever dreamed of walking into. I spent a week visiting ballrooms and conference centers in the city's nicest hotels. It was during one of these scouting trips, at the elegant Parkview Hotel, that I ran into my Aunt Carol. She was coming out of the hotel's high-end boutique, a shopping bag in her hand. When she spotted me standing in the lobby, taking notes in a binder, her face, usually soft and pliable, registered a flicker of confusion, then alarm. "Chloe, what on earth are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a flustered whisper as she hurried over to me. She glanced around nervously, as if my very presence here was a scandal waiting to happen. "Hi, Aunt Carol," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm just working, scouting a venue for a client." Her eyes widened, and she gave me a look of such profound, heart-wrenching pity that it felt like a physical blow. It was the same look she'd given me my whole life, a silent apology for the way the rest of the family treated me. She was a kind woman, my Aunt Carol, but her kindness was wrapped in a thick layer of fear. She was my mother's sister, and she was terrified of being cast out of the family's good graces, so she remained a silent enabler, a gentle witness to their cruelty. "Oh, Chloe," she whispered, leaning in close. "Your mother is just so worried about you. This, this event planning thing." She said it as if it were a strange illness. "It's not a real career. Jessica is a partner at her law firm now, you know. She's doing so well." I felt the familiar sting of the comparison. Of course Jessica was doing well. I was reminded of it every single day. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Aunt Carol's face softened with what she thought was compassion. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out her wallet. With a furtive glance around the lobby, she pressed a crisp $20 bill into my hand, closing my fingers over it. "Here," she said, her voice full of earnest sympathy. "Get yourself a nice lunch. You look tired." She gave my hand a quick, nervous squeeze, and then hurried away, as if she'd just completed a dangerous covert operation. I stood there, in the opulent lobby, the $20 bill crinking in my palm. The gesture, meant to be kind, was just another form of humiliation. She didn't see a businesswoman scouting a location. She saw her poor, struggling niece, a charity case who needed a handout to afford lunch in a place like this. The pity was almost worse than the scorn. It affirmed their narrative, that I was a lost cause. A few days later, I had another encounter that solidified my resolve to keep my new life a complete secret. I was meeting with a potential florist in the city's flower district, a vibrant, chaotic street overflowing with buckets of roses and hydrangeas. As I rounded a corner, laden with catalogs, I literally bumped into someone, sending a shower of floral price lists fluttering to the sidewalk. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, crouching down to gather them. "No problem at all," a smooth, familiar voice replied. I looked up and my heart sank. It was Liam, my sister's fiancé. He was dressed in a sharp suit, clearly on his way to or from a power lunch. He recognized me instantly, a flicker of surprise followed by a polite, controlled smile. "Chloe, right?" he said, helping me pick up the last of the papers. "Jessica's sister." "Hi, Liam," I said, my cheeks flushing. He handed the catalogs back to me, his eyes glancing at the bold print. Wholesale floral arrangements. His smile widened slightly, and it was the same smile I'd seen at the dinner party. Polite, polished, and utterly condescending. It was the smile of someone who was leagues above you and knew it. "Still doing the party thing, I see," he said, his tone light and breezy. The kind of tone you'd use for a child's lemonade stand. "Good for you. It's important to have a passion." The words "party thing" and "passion" hung in the air between us, cheapening everything I was working for. He saw a girl playing with flowers, not a woman building a business. He had only ever heard Jessica's version of my story, and it was clear he believed every word. I was the quirky, ambitionless little sister with a cute hobby. "It's going well, thanks," I said, my voice tight. "Great, great," he said, already looking past me, his mind clearly on more important things. "Well, good to see you, Chloe. I'll tell Jessica I ran into you." He gave a final dismissive nod and walked away, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd. I stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the sweet scent of flowers, feeling anything but sweet. These two encounters, with my pitying aunt and my condescending future brother-in-law, were a stark reminder of how my family saw me. They were incapable of seeing me as anything other than the role they had assigned me, the failure. They would never see my struggle. They would never understand my ambition. And right then I made a promise to myself. They wouldn't see any of it. Not the late nights, not the anxiety, not the small victories. They would see nothing until they were forced to see everything. My success would not be a gradual reveal, it would be an ambush. The corporate reunion was a turning point. I poured every ounce of my energy and creativity into it. Mr. Chen had called it a dry, boring affair, and he was right. The company was in a stuffy, old-fashioned industry, and their past events were notoriously dull. I decided not to fight it, but to lean into it. I created a vintage boardroom theme, with classic cocktails, a jazz trio, and elegant, understated decorations. I focused on flawless execution, seamless check-in, impeccable service, and a schedule that ran like clockwork. It was a huge success. The attendees, who had arrived expecting stale crackers and lukewarm coffee, were blown away. The CEO of the subsidiary company, a man who looked like he hadn't smiled since the 1980s, actually sought me out to shake my hand. "Best event we've had in 20 years, he'd grumbled, which was the highest compliment he was capable of giving. The most important review, however, came from Mr. Chen. He hadn't attended, but he had clearly received a full report. He summoned me to his office the following week. The board was impressed, he said, getting straight to the point. You made something from nothing. It seems Eleanor was right about you. From that day on, things changed. My secret transformation went into overdrive. Mr. Chen became my silent partner, my mentor in the shadows. He started feeding me bigger clients from his vast network. First, it was a charity luncheon for a well-known foundation, then, a product launch for a luxury brand. Each event was more complex, more high-profile, and more lucrative than the last. My income, which had once been a trickle, grew exponentially. I was no longer just a party planner. I was becoming a brand. Elysian Events was getting a reputation for unparalleled quality and creativity. The money was life-changing. I moved out of my tiny apartment and into a modest but comfortable condo. I hired a small, loyal team, a sharp assistant and two hardworking coordinators who believed in my vision, but my life became a blur of work. I was fueled by coffee and spite, working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I was building an empire in the dark, and the secrecy was exhausting. I lived a double life. To my family, I was still poor Chloe with her little hobby. I dodged questions about my work, giving vague answers that kept their narrative intact. The loneliness was a constant companion, a quiet ache in the midst of my soaring success. One afternoon, about 8 months after our first meeting, Mr. Chen called me to his office. This time, his demeanor was different. There was a spark of excitement in his stern eyes. He gestured to a set of architectural blueprints laid out on his massive desk. "The Astoria Grand Hotel," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A historic landmark. But it's been failing for years. Mismanaged, outdated. It went on the market last week." I looked at the blueprints. The Astoria Grand was a legend, a beautiful old-world hotel that had once been the crown jewel of the city. "It's a shame," I said. "It has so much potential." "Precisely," Mr. Chen said. He looked up at me. "I am leading a consortium of investors to purchase it. We are going to gut it, restore it to its former glory, and make it the city's premier luxury hotel and event venue." I nodded, impressed. "That's an incredible project." "It is," he agreed, "but a building is just a building. It needs a soul. It needs a vision. The investors have the money, but they need a leader. someone to run the entire hospitality group, to oversee the rebranding, to make it the most sought-after destination in the country. They need a CEO. My heart began to pound. I had a feeling I knew where this was going, but it seemed too impossible to believe. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. I told him I know the perfect person for the job. Someone with an unmatched eye for detail, a relentless work ethic, and the ability to create magic out of thin air. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. I told him about you, Chloe. I was shocked into silence. Me? CEO? It was a title so far beyond my wildest dreams that I couldn't even process it. Mr. Chen? I I don't know what to say. I'm an event planner. You are an event planner, he corrected gently. Now you are a businesswoman. And a very successful one. I have watched you. You are ready. He then delivered the final stunning blow. The position comes with a significant salary, and with my backing as the primary investor, a substantial ownership stake in the new Astoria Hospitality Group. Owner. The word echoed in the silent, sunlit office. My secret was no longer just a successful business. It was an empire in the making. My legs felt weak, but my voice when I found it was steady. I accept. My first official project as the new CEO and part owner of the Astoria Hospitality Group was a monumental task to plan and execute the grand reopening of the Astoria Grand Hotel. We decided to launch with the city's most exclusive and high-profile charity event of the year, the Starlight Charity Gala. The guest list included everyone from the mayor to movie stars, to the city's most powerful business leaders. The buzz around the gala and the hotel's rebirth was immense. For months, it was all anyone in the city could talk about. And I was the secret architect behind it all. A ghost pulling the strings from the shadows. I was living and breathing the Astoria project. My days were a whirlwind of meetings with architects, designers, and marketing teams. My nights were spent poring over budgets and guest lists. I was more exhausted and more exhilarated than I had ever been in my life. The secrecy was a heavy cloak, but the thought of the final reveal was the fuel that kept me going. It was in the midst of this controlled chaos that my old world came crashing into my new one. My phone rang one afternoon, and the caller ID sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Jessica. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since she'd left a string of angry voicemails after I'd dodged her questions about my silly little business. I let it ring for a moment, then against my better judgment I answered. Chloe? Her voice was tight with panic, all of its usual arrogance stripped away. Chloe? I have a massive problem. I waited, saying nothing. It's my wedding planner, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. The one I told you about, Celeste Venti, the best in the city? She quit. She just quit, she said. I was being unreasonable. Can you believe that? I could, actually. I could believe that very easily. My wedding is in 3 months, Chloe, she wailed, and now her voice shifted, taking on a tone of forced sweetness that set my teeth on edge. And I thought of you. You're so good at this sort of thing. All your little parties. My hand tightened on my phone. Here it was. Chloe, I need you, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You have to help me. You owe me. As my sister. You can plan my wedding. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After years of mocking my passion, of calling me a failure and a loser, she was now demanding my expertise. And of course, there was no mention of payment. She didn't see me as a professional whose time was valuable. She saw me as her little sister, a family resource to be exploited. She expected me to drop my entire life, a life she had no concept of, and plan her lavish high society wedding for free, as an obligation. This was it. This was the final test. The old Chloe, the girl who was desperate for a crumb of approval, would have caved. She would have seen this as a chance to finally prove her worth. To win their love. She would have said yes in a heartbeat. But the old Chloe was gone. I took a deep, steadying breath, A cold, quiet calm settled over me. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were observing this conversation from a great distance. "I'm sorry, Jessica," I said, my voice polite, level, and completely firm. "I'm not available." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. She was clearly not expecting that answer. "What do you mean, you're not available?" she sputtered. "What could you possibly be doing that's more important than my wedding?" "I'm busy with a major project," I said simply, offering no other details. Her shock quickly curdled into rage. The fake sweetness vanished, replaced by the familiar, venomous contempt. "A major project?" she shrieked into the phone. "Planning some kid's birthday party? Are you serious right now? I can't believe how selfish you are. You are so ungrateful. After everything this family has done for you, you are a failure, Chloe. A pathetic failure who can't even find it in her heart to help her own sister." The insults, which once would have shattered me, now felt like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. They bounced off, harmless. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just listened to her tirade until she paused to take a breath. And then I hung up. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. But underneath the adrenaline, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a powerful, liberating sense of freedom. I had finally said no. A week after I refused to plan Jessica's wedding, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was "Family Christmas Party," and the sender was my mother. My stomach twisted into a familiar knot of dread. I opened it, my finger hovering over the delete button. The email was written in my mother's signature style, bubbly, cheerful, and laced with passive-aggressive poison. "Dearest family," it began. "With the holidays just around the corner, and with Jessica and Liam's big day approaching, your father and I decided we should do something extra special for our family Christmas celebration this year. We have managed to book the brand new, ultra-exclusive Founder Suite at the newly renovated Astoria Grand Hotel. Can you believe our luck? It's the most talked about spot in the city." My blood ran cold. The Founder Suite. My Founder Suite. The one I had personally designed with the architects, the one reserved for the hotel's most important VIPs. My mother continued, oblivious. "We know it's a bit above your usual price range, darling," she wrote, addressing me directly now. The word "darling" was a tiny, sharp needle. "But we insist you be there. It's so important for Liam and his parents to see our whole family together, happy and celebrating. Please, please don't make an excuse. It would mean the world to us." The manipulation was so blatant it was almost comical. It was a power move, a carefully orchestrated performance for the benefit of Liam and his wealthy family. They were going to parade their success in the city's most luxurious new hotel, and they wanted me there as the designated pauper, the living embodiment of failure to contrast with Jessica's shining success. It was a trap, designed to make me feel small and poor one last time, in the most public way possible. They had absolutely no idea that they were planning their party in my house. My first instinct was to refuse, to send back a curt reply and have nothing to do with it. But then, a slow, cold anger began to bubble up inside me. For years I had been their punchline. For years I had endured their pity and their scorn. They had set the stage for my final grand humiliation. But they had accidentally set it in my own theater. I forwarded the email to Mr. Chen, with a single line. "What should I do?" His reply came a few minutes later. "Go," he wrote. "An enemy who underestimates you is a gift. Accept their invitation, and let them walk into the trap they set for you." A rare smile seemed to radiate even from his brief text. A cold, sharp thrill ran through me. He was right. This wasn't just a party. It was an opportunity. This was the stage for the will reading of their old, arrogant worldview. This was where everything would be revealed. I opened my email, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "Dear Mom," I wrote. "It sounds wonderful. I wouldn't miss it for the world. See you at the Astoria." I hit send, The final setup was complete. The bait was taken. The stage was set. The evening of the Christmas party, I stood in my condo, looking at my reflection. I wasn't wearing a flashy ball gown or dripping with jewels. I had chosen a simple, sleeveless black dress, but it was made of a heavy, luxurious silk that draped perfectly, and it was tailored to fit me like a second skin. It was a dress that didn't shout. It whispered. It whispered, power. I took a car to the Astoria Grand. As I stepped out, the doorman, a kind man named George who I'd had coffee with just last week, rushed to open my door. "Good evening, Miss Evans," he said, his voice full of professional respect. "Good evening, George," I replied with a small smile. As I walked through the grand glittering lobby, the staff I passed all greeted me with the same deference. A quiet ma'am here, a respectful nod there. They all knew me as Ms. Evans, the boss, the owner. Before I got in the elevator, I found the general manager, a sharp man named Arthur. "Arthur," I said, keeping my voice low. "My family is upstairs in the founder's suite. They are not aware of my position here. For the next hour, I am just a guest. Please instruct your staff to act as if they don't know me. No special treatment. Do you understand?" Arthur looked confused for a second, but he was a professional. "Of course, Miss Evans. As you wish." I took the private elevator, the one that required a special keycard, up to the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into the foyer of the founder's suite. I could hear the murmur of conversation and laughter from the main room. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and walked in. The moment I entered, the conversation stopped. It was as if a record had scratched. All eyes turned to me. My parents, Jessica and Liam, my Aunt Carol, and two other well-dressed older people I assumed were Liam's parents. They were all standing there, champagne flutes in hand, looking at me as if I were an alien who had just crash-landed in their party. The air was thick with condescension. Jessica, stunning in a sequined red dress, let her eyes travel from my simple black dress to my face, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across her lips. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look what the cat dragged in. Did you have to take out a loan for that dress, Chloe?" My father, standing beside Liam, shook his head with a sigh, as if my very presence was a burden he had to bear. He leaned towards Liam and said in a stage whisper, "She tries her best." My mother rushed forward, her smile brittle. "Chloe, darling, you made it. Come, come, meet Liam's parents, Richard and Eleanor Thompson." I shook their hands politely. They gave me tight, brief smiles, their eyes quickly dismissing me. I was just the strange, unsuccessful little sister they had been warned about. I stood there, a silent observer in my own hotel suite. A room where I had personally approved every single piece of furniture, every swatch of fabric, and for a fleeting moment, a pang of sadness hit me. A deep, aching grief for the family I wished I had, the family that would have been proud of me, that would have celebrated my success instead of using it as a weapon against me. The hesitation was real, a flicker of a thought that maybe I should just let it go, keep my secret, and avoid the inevitable explosion. But then I saw the look on Jessica's face. It was a look of pure, smug triumph. She had me right where she wanted me, on her turf, in front of her perfect new family, ready to be put in my place, and in that instant, the hesitation vanished. It was replaced by a cold, clear certainty. The fire they had lit at that dinner party months ago was about to become an inferno. The humiliation campaign began almost immediately, a series of small, calculated cuts designed to remind me of my place. My mother, while handing me a glass of champagne, accidentally sloshed some on the floor near my feet. "Oh, be careful, Chloe," she said, her voice laced with false concern. "This rug is imported from Morocco. It costs a fortune." My father took Liam on a tour of the suite, loudly pointing out the expensive art on the walls and the panoramic city views. Can you imagine the kind of money it takes to own a place like this? He said, shaking his head in awe, before shooting a pointed look in my direction. Some people are just in a different league. The main event, of course, was Jessica. She made a grand announcement that she had finally secured a new wedding planner and a venue, a ballroom at the Four Seasons, a direct rival to the Astoria. She spoke at length about how exclusive and sought after it was, ensuring everyone understood its prestige. Then she turned her bright, malicious gaze on me. "So, Chloe," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear, "I suppose you're still planning little birthday parties. It's cute," she smiled sweetly. "You must tell me all about your latest project." She leaned back, smug and expectant, ready for me to stammer out some pathetic story about a child's party that would solidify her position as the successful sister, and mine as the family failure. The room was quiet. Liam's parents were watching me with polite disinterest. My Aunt Carol was looking down at her shoes, her shoulders slumped. This was the moment. The kill shot. But before I could speak, a new figure entered the scene. A man dressed in the crisp black uniform of a waiter approached our group. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and he moved with an efficiency that was more than just good training. I recognized him immediately. It was Mark, my head of event security, a retired police detective who was unflappable in a crisis. He was in disguise, just as we had planned. He ignored everyone else in the circle, the wealthy Thompsons, my preening parents, the gloating Jessica. He walked directly to me. "Excuse me, Miss Evans," he said, his voice low and urgent, but perfectly clear in the silent room. My family froze. They looked annoyed, irritated that this common waiter would interrupt their performance. Jessica's face tightened. "We're in the middle of a private conversation," she snapped at him. Mark didn't even glance at her. He kept his eyes fixed on me. He leaned in just slightly, as if sharing a confidential secret. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "we have a security update on the mayor's arrival for the gala tomorrow. Do you have a moment to review the motorcade route?" The words hung in the air, sparking with confusion. Jessica let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Her gala?" she scoffed, looking around the room for support. "What on earth are you talking about? She's a nobody. You must have the wrong person." But Liam, the neutral observer, the savvy tech entrepreneur, wasn't laughing. His eyes, which had been full of polite condescension just moments before, had narrowed. I saw him take in the details. Mark's professional earpiece, the discreet but authoritative posture, that was all wrong for a regular waiter. His mind was clearly working, connecting the dots. "The Starlight Gala?" Liam asked, his voice sharp with sudden interest. He looked from Mark to me. "The one happening here? At the Astoria? That's the biggest charity event of the year. The tickets sold out in an hour." He turned his full attention to me, his expression a mask of genuine, profound confusion. The dismissive smile was gone, replaced by a dawning awareness that the story he'd been told about me was crumbling before his very eyes. "Chloe," he said, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "What is he talking about?" The silence in the room was electric. Every eye was on me. My mother looked bewildered, my father suspicious. Jessica's face was a thundercloud of fury and confusion. She opened her mouth to say something, to dismiss it all as a ridiculous mistake. But before she could, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. "She's running it." Everyone turned. Standing in the archway leading to the suite's main lounge was Mr. Chen. He was holding a small glass of scotch, the amber liquid glowing in the soft light. He was a man who commanded attention without ever raising his voice. His presence alone seemed to suck the air out of the room. He walked slowly towards our group, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush Moroccan rug. He stopped beside me, giving me a brief, respectful nod that did not go unnoticed by Liam. Then, he addressed Liam directly, as if they were the only two people in the room. "Miss Evans is the founder and CEO of Elysian Events," Mr. Chen said, his voice a calm, powerful rumble. "It is the premier event management firm in this city. My company was her first major investor." The word CEO landed like a grenade. My family was utterly, completely shocked. My mother's perfectly painted mouth fell open. Her champagne flute tilted in her hand, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. My father's face, which had been flushed with pride just minutes before, had turned a pasty, sickly white. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. They were speechless, their minds struggling to reconcile the image of Chloe with the cute hobby with the formidable title Miss Chen had just bestowed upon me. But Jessica, always a fighter, recovered first. Rage and disbelief warred on her face. "CEO?" She spat, the word dripping with venom. "That's impossible. It's a lie. She's Chloe," she said, my name as if it were proof in itself, the ultimate evidence that this couldn't be true. As if on cue, the universe decided to provide the final piece of the puzzle. The suite's main door opened and the hotel's general manager, Arthur, rushed in. He looked flustered, his haze slick with a thin sheen of sweat. His eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on me. He hurried over, his expression one of pure, unadulterated panic. "Miss Evans," he exclaimed, his voice tight with anxiety. He completely ignored my stunned family. "I am so sorry for this disturbance. I explicitly told the staff that you were not to be disturbed during your private family reunion." He then straightened up, and his panicked expression hardened into one of stern authority. He turned his gaze on my family, his eyes sweeping over their shocked faces. "I must insist," he said, his voice ringing with the full power of his position, "that you treat our hotel's owner with respect." Owner. The word didn't just hang in the air. It detonated. It obliterated every smug smile, every condescending glance, every casual insult they had ever thrown at me. In the deafening silence that followed, that one single word remade my entire world and shattered theirs. Owner. The silence was absolute. The reaction was not a single event, but a chain reaction of emotional explosions, each one setting off the next. It started with my father. The color drained completely from his face, leaving it a waxy pale gray. He staggered back a step, his hand reaching out to steady himself on a nearby chair. He looked at me, then at Mr. Chen, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. The man who had just an hour ago lectured me on ambition looked as though his entire world had been pulled out from under him. My mother was completely speechless. Her jaw, which had dropped at the word CEO, seemed to have become unhinged at the word owner. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was almost comical. The perfectly constructed mask of the proud matriarch had shattered, revealing the bewildered, terrified woman beneath. The champagne flute finally slipped from her nerveless fingers, crashing to the rug with a dull thud, the golden liquid spreading like a stain. And then there was Jessica. Her face was a terrifying canvas of warring emotions. First, there was stark, raw disbelief. Then, as her eyes darted from the panicked general manager to the calm, imposing figure of Mr. Chen, and finally to me, the disbelief curdled into a dark, venomous rage. Her knuckles were white, where she gripped her own glass. Her entire body was vibrating with a fury so intense it seemed to suck the very light from around her. Her success, her identity had been built on the foundation of my failure, and I had just dynamited that foundation. But the most validating reaction of all came from Liam, the neutral observer. He just stared at me, his handsome face a mask of dawning comprehension. He looked from my calm expression to Jessica's contorted one, and I could see the puzzle pieces clicking into place in his sharp, analytical mind. He was reevaluating every story Jessica had ever told him, every dismissive comment, every casual insult. The condescension that had been in his eyes all evening was gone, vaporized. It was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock, which slowly morphed into something else, a look of dawning horror, and then, unmistakably, a look of profound, staggering respect. He finally understood the woman he had been told was a loser, a nobody with a party thing, was arguably the most powerful person in the room. A small, choked sound broke the suffocating silence. It was my Aunt Carol, the enabler. Tears were streaming down her face as she looked from me to my sister. For the first time, she wasn't just seeing a family squabble, she was seeing the years of relentless, cruel bullying for what it was. And the sheer scale of my secret triumph made the cruelty seem monstrous. Her silent tears were a judgment all their own. Finally, my father found his voice. It was a hoarse, broken stammer. You bought the company? I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held his gaze and gave a small, calm nod. Then, I turned my eyes to Jessica, whose entire world had just been reduced to ashes. My final word to her was quiet, but it was designed to cut deeper than any shout could. You were right, Jessica, I said, my voice as soft and cool as silk. I couldn't afford a dress for your dinner party, so I bought the hotel instead. I let the words land. I watched the last bit of color drain from her face. Then I turned my back on all of them, on their shattered arrogance and their silent shock, and addressed my general manager. Now, Arthur, I said, my voice crisp and professional. If you'll all excuse me, let's go over the final arrangements for my gala. I walked out of the room, leaving them frozen in the ruins. The days that followed were a storm of communication I had no interest in weathering. My phone buzzed relentlessly with frantic voicemails from my parents, each one more desperate than the last. Jessica sent a barrage of texts, cycling through rage, disbelief, and a bizarre, transparent attempt at a sudden reconciliation. I ignored them all. I forwarded the numbers to my assistant with a simple instruction: block these. I had work to do. The Starlight Charity Gala was a historic success. The Astoria Grand's grand reopening was the talk of the country, featured in magazines and on news channels. Every detail was perfect, every moment a testament to the vision I had worked so hard to realize. Standing on the balcony of the grand ballroom that night, looking out at the city lights, I didn't feel vengeful or triumphant. I just felt quiet. The noise of my family's criticism, which had lived in my head for so long, was finally gone. There was only peace. About a week later, my family was summoned to a law office downtown. The firm of Sterling and Finch was the executor of my grandmother's estate. My parents and Jessica arrived together, looking tense and haggard. They assumed it was a final formality, perhaps the disbursement of some minor assets Grandma had left behind. They walked into the polished, wood-paneled conference room and froze. I was already there, sitting at the head of the long table, next to a severe-looking lawyer in a gray suit. "Chloe," my mother breathed, her voice a nervous whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited," I said simply. "Please, sit." They took seats at the far end of the table, as far away from me as possible. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, cleared his throat and began. He explained that my grandmother, Eleanor Evans, had structured her will in a rather unconventional way. The $25,000 inheritance Miss Chloe Evans received upon her 28th birthday was, in fact, a test, he said, his voice dry and emotionless. He looked down at the document. It was stipulated in the will that if Chloe could successfully use that seed money to create a profitable business within 2 years, she would unlock the second and final phase of her inheritance. My family stared at him, confused. "What second phase?" my father asked, his voice rough. Mr. Sterling put on a pair of reading glasses. "The final phase makes Miss Chloe Evans the sole beneficiary and trustee of the Eleanor Evans Family Trust." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This trust, which your mother secretly established years ago, holds the controlling shares in the Astoria Grand property, several other commercial realings, and the entirety of the Evans family investment portfolio." The blood drained from my father's face. My mother gasped. Jessica shot to her feet. "That's our money. That's our family's money." It was your mother's money, Mr. Sterling corrected calmly, and she has entrusted its management to her granddaughter. He slid a final document across the polished table towards them. As the new trustee, Miss Evans has full discretionary power over all distributions from the trust, including your personal accounts which are funded by it. I looked at my trembling parents and my seething sister. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I didn't say a single word. I simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Mr. Sterling. He cleared his throat. I have here an official notice for each of you, he said, handing them 3 envelopes. As of 9 a.m. this morning, per the trustee's orders, access to all trust-funded accounts has been suspended pending a complete financial review. I had frozen their credit cards. I had frozen their line of credit. I had frozen everything. The looks on their faces shifted from anger and confusion to something else entirely. Pure, primal terror. Their entire lifestyle, their status, their power, it was all built on a foundation of money they no longer controlled. I hadn't screamed at them. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply taken away the weapon they had used to hurt me for my entire life. The power was mine now, and their first lesson was going to be humility. My story is proof that the labels other people give you, failure, loser, nobody, only have power if you let them. The world saw me as small because that's what my family told them to see. But I learned that true strength isn't about shouting your worth. It's about building it in silence and letting your success be the noise. I'm sure many of you have been put in a box or given a label you refuse to accept. What was it? And how did you prove it wrong? Let me know your story in the comments below. I'll be reading them. And if this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of a quiet comeback, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning pain into power. Thanks for watching.